Tonight, arson charges in Saskatchewan as wildfires rage.
With the arrest, it's heartbreaking.
2 people accused of deliberately setting wildfires as smoke travels east, pushing air quality to dangerous levels. The Prime Minister defends inviting India's leader to the G7 in Alberta.
India is the 5th largest economy in the world.
Despite RCMP allegations, India's government is waging a campaign of violence on Canadian soil.
What I heard was that India is too big to be held accountable.
From that public blow-up to icy indifference.
I'm not thinking about it a lot.
Republicans try and fail to rekindle relations between Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Thanks for joining us. Tensions are high in Saskatchewan tonight after 2 people were charged with arson. Both are accused of deliberately setting wildfires in the province's north, where conditions are tinder dry. The province is now battling 25 active blazes. Thousands have been forced from their homes. Many evacuees now scrambling for shelter, supplies, and answers about what they've lost and what comes next. Cameron McIntosh is in Prince Albert tonight with more on the charges and evacuees' frustrations.
They keep throwing all they have at it. Even with an intensive firefight, it's not stopping. The ditch fire, which left this scorched and smoldering in the area near Wyakwin, is still spreading.
Not even doing a damn thing.
While in La Ronge, the Pissu fire swept into downtown, taking out 2 buildings and threatens to do it again. Now, says Saskatchewan's premier, 2 fires in those areas were deliberately set.
The RCMP have informed us that they have now charged a couple of individuals.
RCMP say an 18-year-old woman and a 36-year-old man each face 1 count of arson. Wildfires have driven up to 15,000 people from their homes in Saskatchewan alone, some leaving under harrowing circumstances. In this evacuee assistance center in Prince Albert, there was already plenty of exhaustion and anxiety.
With the arrest, it's heartbreaking. Whoever it is doing this to our people, the people around the whole community of Prince Albert and Saskatchewan, it's disappointing in my eyes.
There's also been frustration over the initial speed of the Red Cross response.
Nobody seems to know where we're going, and we're going in circles.
Henry McKenzie calling for help registering some elders, to be told,
I'll see if I can get someone to reach out here.
It takes the first few days of these things are always, hectic.
The Red Cross says it's catching up. 8,000 people are registered in Saskatchewan so far, 1,000 hotel rooms secured, with more to come.
We won't turn people away. We are registering anybody that's been evacuated.
All as about 600 firefighters deal with 23 fires. For now, the province is rejecting calls to bring in the military. In Manitoba, 3,800 people were airlifted by the Air Force from fly-in communities. Premier Moe says Saskatchewan hasn't faced that yet.
Up until now, we've been fortunate in the way that we have been able to preserve largely road access.
Now, the military has sent personnel to assist with wildfires on the ground in the past, but says Moe, not with the skill sets Saskatchewan needs right now.
Now, Cam, we know 2 of these fires are suspected to be arson. What more do we know about how the others may have started?
Well, human activity, and it's the same story here in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba, where most of the boreal forest is under either dry conditions or even drought conditions. So whether it's a hiker, an ATV, or an ember flying out of a fire pit somewhere, even the slightest spark can start something big. Erica?
Okay, thanks for this, Cameron. Cameron McIntosh in Prince Albert tonight. Smoke from those fires in the prairies and the west is moving east, blanketing southern Ontario and Quebec. You can see the dark colors are the worst affected areas. Major cities like Montreal and Toronto experienced some of the worst air quality in the world. Ithel Musa shows us the harmful haze that may keep people indoors this weekend.
From Toronto to the nation's capital, Quebec City and Niagara Falls, heavy smoke from western wildfires clogged the air.
Ottawa is beautiful, and usually the sky is clear, so this was a bit surprising.
You can feel a little heaviness in the lungs this morning, for sure. It was noticeable, like right away when you got outside.
On Friday, Toronto and Montreal ranked among the top 5 polluted cities in the world, according to global tracker IQ Air. Toronto and Ottawa also scored above 10 on Environment Canada's Air Quality Health Index, indicating a very high health risk.
By staying indoors, you can improve your health as long as you keep your windows closed, have a high quality filter in your furnace so that all that air is passing through that filter.
Health experts say wildfire smoke is a toxic mix of fine particles, carbon monoxide, and harmful chemicals that can cause serious health effects, especially for at-risk groups like seniors or young children.
They can cause things like strokes, heart attacks, and arrhythmias, and they're the ones that are implicated in the higher mortality risk during these periods.
And making it all worse, wildfires are getting larger, burning longer, and near more populated places, says this expert.
This is air that's very unhealthy for all people. Doesn't even fit in athletic people. Can't perform and go running in the morning or in the evening with this kind of air.
Phillips says the air pollution from wildfires is persistent and it will only get worse. Other experts say for those forced to work outside, it's crucial to wear high-quality respirator masks that protect the lungs from that harmful smoke. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
The federal government has tabled its One Canadian Economy bill, designed, it says, to cut down internal trade barriers and supercharge nation-building projects. Kate McKenna digs into the details.
Good afternoon. It's a new bill the Prime Minister says will change the country.
Today is an important day for Canada, and it's a day that has literally been decades in the making.
Mark Carney looking to remove federal barriers to trade within Canada and speed up approvals for infrastructure projects.
For too long, when federal agencies have examined a new project, their immediate question has been why. With this bill, we will instead ask ourselves how.
It's a move to fight back against the economic carnage caused by Donald Trump's tariffs.
We need to respond with speed. We need to retool, as the Prime Minister says, retool our economy.
Projects deemed to be in the national interest will get fast-tracked, including mines, ports, and pipelines. To qualify, projects must strengthen Canada's security, provide economic benefits, have a strong likelihood of success, advance the interests of Indigenous peoples, and contribute to hitting climate goals.
I like very much when we say we will accelerate the start of projects. I like that very much.
Let's put Manitobans to work, and let's use that work to build up this country that we love so much.
Before shovels hit the ground, Ottawa must consult Indigenous partners.
I hope that they don't ram it through, because First Nations and Canadians need time to look through this and how does this affect us. Let's do things properly and carefully.
It's baby steps when we needed a giant leap.
The Conservative leader says he'd prefer government repeal laws stifling development, but he is not ruling out his party's support.
Our test is whether or not legislation is perfect, but whether it is better than the way things are.
The Prime Minister says he's willing to extend the parliamentary sitting to pass the bill if necessary, but there are other hurdles. Carney says projects require consensus from provinces to go ahead. That can be hard to find. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
With the economy under pressure, Canada's unemployment rate is continuing to rise, though new data today isn't as bad as some expected. Unemployment hit 7% in May, according to Stats Canada, up slightly from April. That's the highest it's been since 2016, outside of the pandemic. Among the sectors that saw losses, manufacturing, which shed just over 12,000 jobs. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is coming to Canada at the personal invitation of Prime Minister Mark Carney. As you'll hear from Evan Dyer, this is despite what the RCMP says is an India-sponsored campaign of murder and coercion on Canadian soil.
Maninder Bol says the RCMP warned him he could be the target of an India-sponsored assassination, and he's stunned now that India's Prime Minister is being welcomed to Canada.
Somehow we're normalizing relations without actually asking for India to cooperate with us, and that means that risk is probably even higher now.
Now, after Prime Minister Mark Carney invited Narendra Modi to attend the G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta later this month.
India, the fifth largest economy in the world, effectively the most populous country in the world, central to a number of those supply chains, at the heart of a number of those supply chains, so it makes sense.
What I heard from Prime Minister Carney today was that India is too big to be held accountable, that sick lives can be bargained away, and I also heard that national security, the rule of law, can be traded away for supply chains. That's what I heard.
It was just last fall that the RCMP said the Modi government was behind a campaign of violence in Canada.
Harassment, intimidation, coercion, even homicides.
There's no sign that campaign has ended.
I was not supportive of this invitation.
In Surrey, even the local MP, a Liberal, says Modi shouldn't be welcomed in Canada. 2 years ago, Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar was killed in his riding, a crime the RCMP has linked to the Modi government.
I'm hearing, tens and hundreds of calls and messages from my constituents who are right now, they're worried, they're concerned, not only about Mr. Nijjar and his family getting a justice, but also their lives.
This is still a pretty deep freeze in the relationship, but it's begun to thaw.
This expert says the Carney government appears determined to turn the page.
If you're pragmatic and a realist, which Prime Minister Carney certainly projects himself as being and is seen to be, it's hard not to invite India as the fastest growing large economy in the world.
The Carney government says the invitation is necessary, that Canada needs to be in communication with India because of its importance on the world stage, but diplomatic relations between the two never did fully stop.
Now, Evan, Ottawa is still in theory calling for India to cooperate with the Nijjar investigation and to halt any campaign of violence.
Yes, and yet they don't claim to have any new commitments from India on either of those two counts. And that's why some Sikh Canadians feel their safety is being compromised, that this invitation sends a message to India that you can kill a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil and still get a red carpet welcome.
Okay, thanks for this. That's Evan Dyer in Ottawa.
Thanks.
Mark Carney says Canada is also working to recalibrate its relationship with China, which has been fraught and frosty for years. The Prime Minister's office says he recently spoke with China's premier and the two agreed to, quote, regularize channels of communication. They also talked trade, with Carney bringing up China's tariffs on Canadian canola and seafood products. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back in the U.S. tonight. The Maryland man was wrongfully deported to a notorious El Salvador prison. Lawmakers and judges have demanded his return for weeks. Now, Sasha Petrusik explains the Trump administration has finally relented, so Abrego Garcia can face fresh charges.
El Salvador's prisons have been home to 268 Venezuelans and Salvadorans abruptly shipped out by the U.S. government almost 3 months ago. Among them, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an immigrant officials said was mistakenly deported, held beyond the U.S. government's control, but now shipped back.
Abrego Garcia has landed in the United States to face justice.
Returned to face criminal charges.
Abrego Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring.
Highlighted by a visit to Abrego Garcia by a Democratic senator, his deportation became a symbol of criticisms against the Trump administration and its aggressive immigration policies. Human rights groups took up his cause. The U.S. Supreme Court ordered the government to facilitate his return.
They'll stop at nothing at all, even some of the most preposterous charges imaginable, just to avoid admitting that they made a mistake.
Abrego Garcia's lawyers deny it, but Donald Trump insists he is a gang member, and the case will vindicate his government's approach.
Show everybody how horrible this guy is, and frankly, we have to do something because the judges are trying to take the place of a president.
Democrats say it just proves the government can return others.
And hopefully they'll bring back the other 250 plus Venezuelans and others who are in this odd status of deportation, even though they haven't done anything or been convicted of any criminal activity.
But this case also shows that the Trump administration seems reluctant to defy court orders, to challenge judges, even if it insists that's exactly what it should be doing. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Washington.
After a spectacular, very public meltdown, there's little sign U.S. President Donald Trump is mending fences with his biggest donor and former advisor, Elon Musk. As Paul Hunter explains, Trump's message to Musk: he's so over him.
Ask Donald Trump what he's thinking about Elon Musk now, and the answer is, in effect, Elon who?
Honestly, I've been so busy working on China, working on Russia, working on Iran, working on so many that I'm not thinking about Elon.
The one-time seemingly inseparable pair, the U.S. president and the richest man on earth, fractured in a jaw-droppingly bizarre string of online slapdowns, each targeting the other.
And, you know, Elon's upset because
Trump distancing himself from his former ally and major campaign donor who'd been slamming Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, potential legislation Musk now trashes as way too costly.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. So still no phone call with Mr. Musk.
On Capitol Hill, the Republican Speaker of the House said he hopes the two can reconcile, but underlines for him it's the bill that matters.
I don't think the American people care much about Twitter wars. I think they care about us accomplishing our legislative agenda.
For Trump and Musk, what a ride it had been. A few weeks ago, Trump even purchasing one of Musk's Tesla vehicles as a show of support for Musk.
Everything's computer.
At Trump's behest, Musk had been overseeing deeply controversial cuts to the U.S. bureaucracy. Sometimes, it seemed, gleefully.
Thank you, Elon. Thank you. Take care.
When Musk ended his time at the White House, Trump happily offered a farewell gift. But soon after, Musk began his tirade against that big, beautiful bill and against Trump for promoting it. By the way, that red Tesla still parked just a few steps from the White House, complete with Florida plates. It's reportedly now up for sale. The man he bought it from suggests the president no longer needed either.
The U.S. can survive without almost anybody, except me.
Asked if there are efforts by some to reconnect the two, said Trump, there are efforts, but he's not really interested in that.
But Paul, clearly this breakup could be costly for both men.
Yeah, look, I mean, the various companies controlled by Musk get billions in federal contracts every year. Earlier in this spat, Trump threatened to cut federal contracts to those companies, and tonight he reiterated that, saying, quote, we'll take a look at everything. Musk, he said, gets a lot of money. He gets a lot of subsidy. We'll take a look at that. Meanwhile, Musk continues to punch back, still suggesting there ought to be a third major political party in this country. He calls it the America Party. Erica.
Okay, thanks for this, Paul. Paul Hunter in Washington. A Toronto man has been charged for allegedly exporting restricted electronic components to Russia and evading sanctions.
These are items that the Russian military does seek to procure.
The RCMP say Anton Trofimov, a Russian national, shipped electronic parts to China and then on to Russia that could be used in the war against Ukraine, including in military drones. Just days after Ukraine carried out one of the largest attacks ever on Russian soil, Moscow strikes back. The thunderous retaliation and the dampening hopes for peace. Next. Plus, new research linking popular diabetes drugs like Ozempic to eye disease.
It's like having a blind spot right in the middle of your vision.
But how big is the risk? And later, Canada's Prince of the Ballet takes a final bow.
This is one of the saddest things I've had to do in my life because it's over.
Guillaume Cote's farewell curtain call is our moment. We're back in 2. Palestinians across Gaza marked the start of one of Islam's most important holidays, Eid, among ruins. Since a ceasefire ended in March, Israel has limited aid and intensified military operations across the Strip. At least 4 people are dead after Russia unleashed a wave of drones and missiles on Ukraine. Moscow says it's retaliation for Sunday's strike on its warplanes. Briar Stewart now with the destruction and renewed calls for an end to this conflict.
The unmistakable buzz of a drone, then an explosion. It continued like this for hours in Kiev and in other cities across Ukraine. You can see the moment a missile plows into the city of Lutsk in the northwest. In the daylight, the destruction was much clearer. So was the grief. 3 rescuers were killed when responding to a strike in the capital. I had to remember these guys who died for us, said Ludmila Netchai. So many decent people are dying. In Kiev, this high-rise building also came under attack. Inside, helping with the cleanup, a Canadian, Etienne Rousseau from Sherbrooke, Quebec.
Basically, we are fixing the windows. We go from apartment to apartment and we make the windows safe.
This is Rousseau's 3rd trip to Ukraine to volunteer.
You feel like you contribute to at least make their life a little better than it was this morning compared like overall in this bad situation. So yeah, it's a good feeling to help.
The strikes came after Moscow vowed retribution for Ukraine's earlier attacks on its warplanes. Ukraine's president again urged Europe and the U.S. to increase its pressure on Russia. But Donald Trump isn't talking like he's about to do that, instead comparing Kiev and Moscow to children fighting.
You try and pull them apart, they don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart.
But Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has been going on for more than 3 years, and Moscow shows no sign of letting up. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
New concerns tonight about diabetes drugs like Ozempic.
Any tool used incorrectly or badly with inappropriate care can cause harm.
Why diabetes patients could be at higher risk of losing their sight. Next. Plus, driven by oil and gas, resource-rich Alberta has long been hailed as Canada's economic engine.
Alberta historically has the highest levels of real GDP growth, highest levels of real GDP per person.
But how does the province's contribution stack up against the rest of the country? And it's been a decades-long global challenge. Could hydrogen fusion be used to create a sustainable, limitless form of energy?
We're putting more energy into creating the fusion than actually comes out of the process.
A Canadian company thinks it may have the solution. The National breaks down the stories shaping your world. Next.
On behalf of the European Space Agency, we are opening our arms very widely.
The head of the European Space Agency signing a joint statement reaffirming cooperation with Canada. The long-standing partnership is taking on new significance amid growing concerns about our relationship with the U.S. The new agreement gives Canadian industry bidding access to dozens of upcoming European space missions. Popular weight loss drugs like Ozempic are being linked to severe vision loss for some diabetics. That's according to a new study from Canadian scientists. As Christine Burak explains, although the risk remains low, it has doubled.
So it's like having a blind spot right in the middle of your vision.
He's talking about macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness in people over 65.
Here you can see
This retinal surgeon led a study looking at whether newer diabetes drugs like Ozempic and Mounjaro might increase the risk of certain eye diseases. The findings?
There was a risk that was twice as high of developing this wet macular degeneration in patients who are on the GLP-1 receptor agonist compared to those diabetic patients who are not.
Double the risk, but the study puts that number in perspective. Researchers in Ontario examined the health records of nearly 140,000 older adults with diabetes. They found, among those taking newer GLP-1 drugs, the risk of developing neovascular age-related macular degeneration was 2 in 1,000. For non-GLP-1 users, It was 1 in 1,000. A small risk, but the research can be meaningful.
There's many times when there's these wonder drugs that come out, and sometimes we find other effects that weren't anticipated.
Doctors all agree the health benefits of GLP-1 drugs for obesity and diabetes patients outweigh the risks.
These medicines are powerful and very, very effective tools, but any tool used incorrectly or badly with inappropriate care can cause harm.
Nobody wants to have their vision affected.
Rick Rangelbraun uses Ozempic to manage his diabetes.
Every medication, there's side effects, and you have to be careful and watch for them, and then bring them to the attention of your doctor.
While the risk is small, some doctors say they may now think twice about prescribing GLP-1s to diabetes patients with pre-existing eye disease, or advise them beforehand. If there's any change in your vision, get checked immediately. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. The global race is on to create a new renewable energy source. The prize, a near limitless clean energy supply.
Our plan is to put our first power plant on the grid in the mid-2030s.
We break down a Canadian company's bold steps to win. But first,
Albertans do contribute, make an outsized contribution to the Federation.
With its resource-rich oil and gas sectors, Alberta has been dubbed Canada's economic engine. But is the claim really true?
So if we're just looking at GDP alone, no, it's not the engine.
Andrew Chang, host of CBC's About That, looks at the metrics, the math, and why both matter to determine the engine behind Canada's complex economic machine.
We all know Alberta is resource-rich. Its economy driven by oil and gas. But does that wealth, the energy, the jobs, the revenue, make Alberta the economic engine of Canada?
In recent decades, Alberta has been an engine of Canada's prosperity.
The economic engine.
The economic engine.
The economic engine.
Even today, this is a claim you can find right on the Government of Alberta website. It's also a frequent argument of the separation movement, which believes Alberta oil is the tireless workhorse of Canada's economy. But is this true? And what explains how we can ask an expert and get an answer like this?
So Alberta historically has the highest levels of real GDP growth, highest levels of real GDP per person.
But then ask a couple of other experts and get this.
So if we're just looking at GDP alone, no, it's not the engine.
Alberta doesn't stand out with an unusually strong contribution, at least in recent years.
So let's look at numbers, yay, and how they can be interpreted differently depending on what point you want to make. Starting with the granddaddy of all numbers when you're talking about economic anything. Alberta is home to one of the largest proven oil reserves in the world. According to the government, they're sitting on somewhere north of 150 billion barrels of oil. That potential is tapped every day, but what's it worth? Looking at GDP is how we can start to answer that question.
Think of it as the total amount of income that is generated each year for individuals, for businesses, and so on within the province.
Right, and if oil is key to your claim of being the horsepower of Canada, you're probably pulling in more dollars and cents each year than any other province, right? Except, let's look at the actual ranking. With the lowest GDP nationwide, the territories, followed by the Atlantic provinces, and the prairies making up the middle of the list. But then, a huge leap into the most productive provinces in Canada. British Columbia is number 4, and can you guess who number 3 is? This is actually where you'll find Alberta. Short of Quebec at number 2 by about $100 billion, adjusted for inflation, and the number 1 spot, and it's not even close, Ontario, by a big margin. And we can look at these same numbers in a slightly different way as well. If we take all those bars and mash them together into a pie, it's easier to see what share of Canada's GDP each province pulls in. Alberta's piece of the pie, just over 15%. So, one might ask, what kind of engine only produces 15% of the drive? Well, one might answer, that's not really a fair way of looking at it.
When you're looking at aggregate GDP, it can be very misleading because, for example, Ontario has more people being productive.
Yes, what we've looked at so far is incomplete because Alberta's 15% share of GDP might actually be pretty good. Let me explain. If we unmake the pie and switch back to bars for a moment, this is every province and territory's share of Canada's GDP. But compare this performance with their share of the population, because this might give us a different sense of whose production is impressive. Because Ontario literally has more than triple Alberta's population, so we should expect its GDP to be much higher, right? But based on population, we can identify all of the provinces who punch below their weight. That's Ontario by a hair, Quebec, Manitoba, and most of the Atlantic provinces. As in, you would expect them to make more money, considering how many people they have. Then, take a look at Alberta, which overperforms. In this sense, easily the most productive province in the country.
GDP can be impacted by A, being more productive, or B, simply having more people. Alberta punches above its weight on GDP per person.
It isn't by itself the biggest single provincial contributor to the Canadian economy. That belongs to Ontario. But for the size of Alberta's population, 5 million people, it contributes about 15% to the Canadian economy, and that's a bit of an outsized contribution.
And that outsized contribution matters in at least one very important way. Okay, you might be thinking, so Alberta's not the most important province, but considering their size, they pull pretty impressive numbers. Why might that make Alberta the economic engine of Canada?
GDP per capita correlates very, very strongly with average income levels of individuals, average wages, average hourly labor compensation.
Yes, and follow me here. He's saying there's a relationship between what we've been talking about, so Alberta's impressive GDP per capita, and how much Albertans make each year. This stat is important enough for Alberta to want to track it very closely, partly because it's a pretty strong selling feature if you're trying to market your province, but it's also a reminder that people with high salaries pay high taxes, and tax revenue spills over into the rest of the country. You're welcome.
In the last 11 years alone, the net transfer from Albertans to the rest of the country was $240 billion. That's a personal contribution to Canada of $55,000 from each and every Albertan.
A number of politicians, especially from Alberta, have made this argument over the years, and it's based on this graph showing which provinces receive equalization payments from the federal government. The Atlantic provinces, Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba. They all receive often billions of dollars a year that Ottawa takes in as tax revenue and then hands out to provinces who can't raise enough taxes to maintain a certain standard of services. So things like healthcare, education, daycares, that sort of thing. Quebec is easily the biggest beneficiary, receiving last year more than $13 billion, which, by the way, is more than what every other province received combined. Alberta, on the other hand, while it does receive health and social transfers, it's gotten nothing in the way of equalization payments, specifically, for the last 60 years.
Ottawa will take our tax dollars and they'll redistribute it in a way to make sure that PEI can deliver the same services as Ontario, BC, or Nunavut. So in that sense, then, Alberta probably pays more in taxes to Ottawa than they get back in services, in part because Alberta's income is higher than it is in the rest of Canada on average.
So from 2007 to 2022, Albertans made a $245 billion net contribution to federal finances. Ontario and British Columbia were the only other net contributors, and Alberta's contribution was 5 times that of either of those provinces.
So if you only look at equalization, it does look unfair, but it's not meant to be that everybody gets the same from equalization. It's meant that equalization sort of shores up those who have less in the way of revenues.
So, is Alberta the economic engine of Canada? Maybe, especially if you consider that federal top-up Quebec got last year, that equalization payment. It was almost 10% of Quebec's total government revenue. For some provinces, the payment's more like 20%.
Albertans do contribute, make an outsized contribution to the Federation, to the rest of Canada.
Now, in the time we have, we can't consider absolutely everything that makes Alberta economically important. But there is more to say about the single most critical feature of Alberta's economy that sets it apart from any other province in both a good way and a bad way. What Alberta does better than anyone else in Canada, without exception, is bring in outside money. Oil and gas together are the #1 Canadian export by a country mile. Alberta is also a hub for petroleum refining, with the overwhelming majority of all exports going to the United States. Tapping into American money is an important driver of Canadian wealth, and the US is an important customer to have, with almost 10 times Canada's population. But this is also where the strength of Alberta's economy becomes more complicated.
We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. We lose in trade deficits.
This graph shows how much of each province and territory's economic output is tied, both directly and indirectly, dependent, really, on the United States. Alberta is in a class of its own. And that makes it much more susceptible to outside forces like price shocks for oil.
Alberta can have exceptionally fast growth and it can have exceptionally large collapses. It lives and dies by non-renewable resources.
And Albertans have viscerally felt this boom-bust cycle in the late 90s.
As world oil prices continue plummeting, Alberta is expecting the worst.
Now oil prices are hovering just over $15 US a barrel, the lowest level in 4 years.
Then, around 15 or so years after that,
companies are cutting back on hiring and investment, and the plummeting price of oil means the government's energy royalties are tumbling too.
And then COVID was a whole other nightmare. Here's the going rate of Canadian crude over the last 20 or so years. At its peak, trading well over $100 a barrel. Those were good times. But during bad times, like when the pandemic destroyed the world's economy, oil worth just a few dollars a barrel. This has meant one very simple thing. If Alberta is the economic engine of Canada, it's an engine that does not always run at peak efficiency.
The boom period that we saw prior to 2015 just hasn't been there. And so Alberta's contributed over those years, the past decade, roughly less than 9% of the total. And Ontario and Quebec combined to account for nearly 2/3. So the larger provinces, of course, tend to contribute most to economic growth, but Alberta doesn't stand out with an unusually strong contribution, at least in recent years.
So how do we answer this question about Alberta's relative importance to the country? Well, look, it's complicated, and there are so many other considerations that we haven't touched on, but Alberta is undeniably important. And during these uncertain economic times, it's still easily one of the biggest cogs in the machine. Boom or bust.
Now, last year, Alberta's economy saw a boom with record oil production. But with Canadian oil and gas now facing 10% U.S. tariffs, this year's growth could be lower. In its drive to create a limitless form of clean energy, a Canadian company is taking a bold new approach.
Our plan is to put our first power plant on the grid in the mid-2030s.
Can Canada win the global fusion race? That's next. In the global race to create an almost limitless clean energy supply, a Canadian company is backing its innovative approach to get there first.
All the work we've done previously has led us to this position.
Achieving energy transition using the same principle that fuels the sun and stars. Johanna Wagstaff takes us through the process, the potential rewards, and the challenges to harness fusion energy.
There's a tech race going on right now. At least 50 companies around the world chasing the same wild dream, clean, limitless energy. Fusion energy could be the next big thing in sustainable power, and Canada is very much in the running. So do we have what it takes to crack it? The answer might be here. This sci-fi looking machine is where Canadian company General Fusion is placing its bet on one of the boldest energy ideas out there. They think they can do what no other company has done yet, essentially creating a star here on Earth. Okay, to understand what I mean, we first need to talk about what is fusion. So really quickly, fusion is when you smash two hydrogen atoms together with such insane force they fuse together. That releases a huge amount of energy at the atomic level, way more than most sources we use today. It's the same concept that powers the sun, and essentially the opposite concept to nuclear fission, where atoms are split apart. Also, fusion uses hydrogen. That's pretty easy to get from water. So we're talking about the potential for sustainable, unlimited energy with no meltdown risk, no long-term radioactive waste, no mining for radioactive ores. That sounds pretty magical, right? Well, there's a catch. The reason no one has been able to do this,
it can't be sustained. We're putting more energy into creating the fusion than actually comes out of the process. So we can start it, but how do we contain it? And how do we contain it for long enough that we can actually get more energy out than we put in to start the fusion reaction?
to get hydrogen atoms to fuse, you need conditions that are hotter than the core of the sun. We're talking hundreds of millions of degrees, and that takes a massive amount of energy. So how is general fusion different?
Behind me is LM26. It will demonstrate fusion conditions in our unique approach called magnetized target fusion, and it will achieve temperatures of 10 million degrees within the next few months, 100 million degrees shortly after that, and ultimately we'll keep those temperatures, increase the density, and get to fusion conditions that we considered break-even conditions, where you actually have the conditions where you get more energy out of the reaction than it took to create it, which will be the first private company in the world to achieve that.
Unlike other teams using giant lasers or magnets to do the fusing, General Fusion is betting on a hybrid approach. They're using compression, straight up mashing like a piston that squishes plasma inside molten lithium. This approach is designed to be cheaper, faster, and easier to scale. It's not just a test though, it's meant to prove that this technology can work outside a laboratory.
Our plan is to put our first power plant on the grid in the mid-2030s. We're on track to do that because of all the work we've done previously has led us to this position now where we've got this machine that over the next 2 years is going to demonstrate break-even fusion conditions, which will be a massive milestone for us and the fusion industry.
They've got backing from governments, private investors, even individuals like Jeff Bezos, because if this works, it could change everything. But let's be real. There's a running joke in the science world. Fusion is always a decade away.
Fusion is unlikely to play a role until probably 2050s, I would imagine. It's important to not take our eye off what is happening now. We have a lot of cost-effective ways of reducing emissions, of cleaning up our electricity system right now. That includes renewables, conventional nuclear, and energy efficiency. We should not wait for this magical solution that may come up in 20 years. It's also important to recognize that even when fusion is developed and is finally commercialized, which I hope will happen in the next coming decades, it's still going to be very expensive.
So can Canada win the fusion race? It's still anyone's game, but if General Fusion pulls this off, Canada wouldn't just be in the race, it could help change the future of energy.
More than 30 countries are currently collaborating on the world's largest fusion project. And earlier this year, they agreed to a new timeline to achieve full magnetic energy by 2036, a key step to achieving nuclear fusion. Up next, a Canadian ballet legend takes his final bow. Our moment is next. This is Guillaume Cote, pictured here, overwhelmed with bittersweet emotions after taking his final bow Thursday night with the National Ballet of Canada. Cote spent 26 years with the company as a dancer and choreographer, making a lasting impact on Canadian ballet. So tonight, the celebration of his lifelong career is our moment.
I joined the National Ballet School at 11 years old. I arrived there and in many ways it was my family, it was my home. I've truly had some of the greatest moments of my life in that building, on that stage. And last night was a moment where it took my breath away. I mean, it was one of the saddest things I've had to do in my life because it's over. but at the same time, one of the most beautiful moments I could have ever asked for. Somehow I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt happy, I felt relieved, I felt really like I'd accomplished what I needed to accomplish there. I hope I can serve as an example of a really beautiful career that a man can have in dance. There's no limit to what dance is. Ballet is open to everyone. The way my career ended was just the ideal scenario. I couldn't be any more grateful. I'm gonna miss being surrounded by all these really amazing people.
And that applause, that standing ovation went on for a solid 8 minutes before the crowd subsided. What a stellar career. And he said he had a lot of memorable moments, but one of his favorites, a role that was special to him, was dancing Romeo, because he said that role just fit him like a glove. Well, congratulations from all of us. And thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Erica Johnson in Vancouver. Take care.